Welcome to the MD's Fantasy Football Show. Now for your host, Dan Mater.
Welcome back, MD Nation. We're back on a regularly scheduled week. We're going to have two recap shows. We're going over all of the Sunday afternoon games in this episode. Another week in the books. Of course, tomorrow we'll have the Sunday night and the Monday night recap along with the waiver wire report, so you guys know what to look for heading into week 8. And it might actually be more than just a pathetic list like it had been the past couple of weeks, which might even prompt me to go back to doing another Sportscaster video. Make sure you're checking me out on there, sportscaster.com. MDFF Show USN is how you can look me up there and start following me along when I have my videos. Very important stuff. Just to kind of give you a little tidbit there. But another week means it leaves us with a whole lot more information to unpack. And of course, things change. Injuries we have to talk about heading into our next week's matchups. We're going into week 8, which is not going to be as much of a bye week as it was this past week. It's only 2 teams on bye in week 8. So we're going to have that to look forward to as well. But we have a lot we have to unpack and talk about from week 7 so we know how to digest the information and move forward. And we're going to go ahead and get right into it because we have a lot to get through, a lot of games to get through, a lot of different factors. And because this is a 2-part recapper, and we're back on a regularly scheduled program, I can get into a little more of the details for each game that we need to take into consideration moving forward. So we're going to hit that break, come back on the other side, and kick off the recaps for the Sunday afternoon games. The MD's Fantasy Football Show is proud to become the newest member of the Belly Up Sports Network. The Belly Up Sports Network is a rising star in the sports industry. After having emerged onto the scene in just a year, they have accrued a massive following with bold articles, standout podcasts, and great debate amongst followers in the forums. Sign up for their newsletter and get access to all of the information throughout the Belly Up Sports Network. Go to bellyupsports.com today to join. Be bold and stand out. So to kick off our recap, we're going to mix things up, and we're going to do a 4 o'clock game first, and we're going to talk about the Chargers and the Tennessee Titans. And the reason we're going to do that is because there's a lot to unpack here. Look, let's kick it off on the Chargers side of the ball, starting off with Melvin Gordon. Did get a few more touches in this one, had 16 carries, so they did make the emphasis that they promised all of us they would to get him the ball more so. And he did score a touchdown, but that was the receiving game. But the big key, of course, the headliner of the game is that twice they tried to run him inside the game to win the ball game, and on the second time, he came up and fumbled. Now, on that first one, it was very close, and I didn't think they had enough to actually overturn it, but they did, and then he winds up fumbling on the second one. The one good thing about Melvin Gordon is that Austin Ekeler's had a history of fumbling at the goal line as well, and they're not going to give up on Melvin Gordon there. You do like the fact that they had 16 carries in this game. You knew it was going to be a tough match against the Tennessee Titans, who have been very good against the run all year. So the fact that they only had 32 yards shouldn't come as a huge surprise, especially since Russell Okung was not able to play in this game as we once hoped and thought throughout the week. It wasn't until Sunday that he was deemed going to be inactive, so the offensive line was still banged up as well. So it was just good to see him get involved to that degree. And the thing with him and Austin Ekeler is Ekeler had a great game in this one. 7 catches, 118 yards, a touchdown, but only 5 carries for 7 yards. So he wasn't more effective. And for a lot of the second half, when the Chargers were trying to come back from behind, Ekeler was lining up as a wide receiver. So that's why he was so involved in the passing game. He wasn't even really lining up in the backfield. He was lining up as a slot wide receiver. They were using him in that capacity. And I think they might continue to use him that way. Travis Benjamin's on the IR. Outside of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Hunter Henry, there aren't any other targets that Philip Rivers seems to trust quite a bit. And they don't really technically have a third receiver to really go to. So I do think Ekeler is reestablishing himself as a flex play per week, especially in PPR leagues, because I think this is something we're going to see moving forward. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing Ekeler and Gordon on the field at the same time quite a bit as well. So these are all things to kind of take in consideration after watching how this game went. Better matchups are ahead, of course, for Melvin Gordon. Philip Rivers able to get back on track in this one. And this is a tough matchup, not just for the running game, but for everybody involved. Tennessee's defense has been very good. So to see Philip Rivers come back in this one, go over 300 yards, throw a couple of touchdowns, play a much better game overall, it does help his streaming ability that you've had him for. He's been a QB2 all season long, but a QB2 that you can spot start in certain situations. This gives you the confidence they've been able to break out of that slump and get going. And Keenan Allen, the same thing. While Keenan Allen only wound up with 4 catches for 61 yards, he went back to being the most targeted receiver at 11. I expect that to continue. He'll break out of his slump as well, especially if Philip Rivers continues to play better, which I do expect to be the case. Mike Williams, once again, no touchdowns. 4 catches, 47 yards on 6 targets, still has not found the end zone. Now, he had a couple opportunities in this one, but he's had a couple opportunities pretty much every single week. He just has not been able to convert for one reason or another. And until he's able to get off the schneid and is able to start converting those red zone looks, I don't know how Mike Williams is anything more than a wide receiver 4 at the moment. He gets a healthy amount of targets per game, so he does have a floor that you can utilize, which does give him some flex appeal if you need to play him for a banged up wide receiver or somebody on bye. And common thinking is that eventually he will start to have to convert some of these opportunities. But because he's not, and not doing so at a high clip, and isn't as consistently involved between the 20s as I expect him to be this season, I think he has to be no more than wide receiver 4 right now. So I'm not dumping Mike Williams by any means, but he is somebody who's pretty much on the bench, and I'm only using him if I have to, not because I see a good matchup to take advantage of. He's no longer a guy who I think even has necessarily the capability of bouncing back to being a wide receiver 2. I think he's a wide receiver 4 who, if he can start getting a couple touchdowns here and there, maybe he becomes a wide receiver 3, but that's his value moving forward. Hunter Henry continues his establishment as a tight end 1, as a guy who could possibly compete to be a top 5 tight end for the rest of the way. 6 catches, 97 yards. He doesn't find the end zone in this one, but he had 8 targets. He is the third. I shouldn't even say that. He is going to be the second best pass catcher on this team on a regular basis. I do think Austin Eckler's usage is going to be a little hit or miss. It's going to be a bit game flow dependent. In this one, they were down by a ton, so they had to come back and use him a lot. But in games where the Chargers are going to be leading, and there will be those games ahead, it's going to be more Melvin Gordon. I don't know how much we're going to see Austin Eckler in those games. So I think on a consistent week-to-week basis, I think Hunter Henry's second to Keenan Allen in this offense as far as targets and opportunities go. And he, of course, in his own right, is also a touchdown threat in any given game as well. So I do think Hunter Henry moving forward has a great opportunity to be a top 5 tight end, and something you should be plugging your lineups pretty much every week, especially given the tight end position right now. On the Titans side of the ball, Ryan Tannehill had a good game, came in, you got to hand it to him. Now, this is the Chargers defense is very banged up, but he was 23 of 29, 312 yards, 2 touchdowns, only 1 pick. He played well. He got the ball out to Corey Davis, who had 6 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown on 7 targets in this game. A.J. Brown, while he didn't get the touchdown, was actually the most targeted pass catcher with 8 and still had 6 catches for 64 yards. Ryan Tannehill simply played more aggressively. And I talked about this heading into the preview show. The one thing about Marcus Mariota and his ineffectiveness, it was clear to me that he felt the need to play conservative. I mean, the second he threw 1 interception, his first one all year, they yanked him and benched him. And I just think a large part of that is that I think he knew he was on a short leash. I think he knew if he made a mistake, they were going to find a reason to put him on the bench. And Ryan Tannehill doesn't have that same short leash. He doesn't have that same pressure on his shoulders with this team because he's the backup quarterback. If he doesn't do as great, it's almost to be expected. He doesn't have this extra layer of pressure on him. Right now, Ryan Tannehill can kind of do the Ryan Fitzpatrick thing where you can just go out and focus on making plays and being aggressive in certain situations. And that panned off really well here. Now, does this mean that Corey Davis and A.J. Brown are going to have, sky's the limit with fantasy value moving forward? No. And we still have to see this for a second start, I think, before we can really start to feel confident about it moving forward. But this does mean there's hope that Corey Davis and A.J. Brown could be wide receiver 3s, wide receiver 4s, guys you can plug in the flex as we get through these bye weeks until week 12. I do think he does offer that kind of opportunity, and this was a good step in the right direction. And it didn't take away from Derrick Henry. He still had 22 carries in this game, 90 yards, a touchdown, was still very solid in this one. The game plan is still going to be to run the ball first with Derrick Henry, especially in their favorable game scripts like they were for most of this game where they had a little bit of a lead and they were able to play defense and run the football. They're able to pass out of that. Maybe Derrick Henry actually is able to have a little more success because he won't have so many 9-man boxes. There's reason for optimistic hope if you're looking at Tennessee Titan players for fantasy purposes. Hopefully, other than Derrick Henry, you're still not leaning on anybody too much. But there's hope that they could actually move forward. And this was a step in the right direction. But let's not forget what Ryan Tannehill is. There's a reason the Dolphins wanted to move on from him. There's a reason he's a backup quarterback, or was a backup quarterback until this point. So let's not forget that either. But it may be better than what it was under Marcus Mariota the rest of the way. The next game up we want to talk about is the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Cincinnati Bengals. This game, had some elements that we expected and some not. Starting off with Gardner Minshew, 255 yards, a touchdown, no interceptions, but a very okay day. But he was still a stream-worthy quarterback, still gave you 20 points in this game. Was able to tack on 48 yards rushing, so that's really what was able to help amplify his fantasy value, and that's something he can do from time to time. And you know what? The Jaguars were in control of this game for most of it. Even when the Bengals were leading this game, and they were leading at one point heading into halftime 7-6, it still didn't feel like the game was ever out of Jacksonville's control. And there wasn't a lot of pressure for Jacksonville to have to be aggressive down the field. So while you would have hoped for better games, maybe you would have hoped for a bigger game out of Minshew, maybe you would have hoped for a bigger game out of DJ Chark, who only had 3 catches for 53 yards on 4 targets. It went kind of with the game flow, too. We knew this possibility. When you play bad teams like the Bengals, or even when some teams play, against the Dolphins, you don't have to do a whole lot to win, and sometimes that can get in the way of, especially the passing game, quarterback, wide receivers, who should be able to take advantage. Sometimes they don't have to. But more times than not, when you play against the Bengals, you're going to have all of your fantasy matchups do what you want them to do. And the rushing game didn't disappoint. So that was one of the elements that we did expect. Leonard Fournette, 29 carries in this game, 131 yards, had only tacked on 2 catches, 14 yards. Wasn't as involved in the passing game. Not that Rykel Armstead was anymore, but just didn't have to go to Leonard Fournette that much out of the backfield. Didn't have to dump it down to him quite as much. Was able to hit his first reads more often than not. But he absolutely, other than not getting a touchdown, Leonard Fournette absolutely dominated this game. To be expected, and that's what you hope for. Now, on the one downside, just a quick little tidbit on Fournette, Cam Robinson did get hurt in this one. Supposedly it was an ankle injury. We'll have to see if that holds him out. That is a big deal. Cam Robinson does wonders for that offensive line when it comes to run blocking. So, they're playing Cincinnati Bengals in this one. Robinson did get hurt early on, but you don't necessarily need Robinson to be able to run on the Bengals. We are going to want to keep our eyes on what exactly is going on with Robinson if he's able to come back sooner rather than later, because that does help quite a bit with Fournette's value. Now, as far as DJ Chark goes, yeah, it wasn't the best game. Better days are ahead for him. As long as Gardner Minshew is the starting quarterback, DJ Chark has an opportunity to score a touchdown in almost any given game. That he's not facing, an elite corner, which you're normally not going to do in this league. So you can still move forward with DJ Chark as, I believe, a low-end wide receiver, too, on a week-to-week basis. And D.D. Westbrook, yes, he's the one who had the big game in this one. 6 catches, 103 yards on 9 targets. He actually was questionable coming into this game. He has been more and more involved over the past few weeks as the offense itself has thrown the ball a little bit more and more as we've moved on through the season, too, and shown more faith in Gardner Minshew having more opportunities. I do believe that this offense right now, as it is constituted, can hold value for 2 fantasy wide receivers on a week-to-week basis. It has graduated. It has impressed me. And while I'm still not a big fan of Gardner Minshew for the long haul, I think for this season, he's going to be able to continue to do what he's been doing and be able to be effective for all of these other guys and still be a streaming quarterback in his own right. On the Bengals side of the ball, they need help. They do. They need help. They need somebody outside of Tyler Boyd who they can go to on a consistent basis down the field. Now, Alex Erickson was the guy of the day. 8 catches, 137 yards on 14 targets, tied with Boyd for the most targets, who only had 6 catches, 55 yards. Alex Erickson has been pretty much a non-factor up until this game. So the only thing I'm going to take out of this is not Alex Erickson's side, but I'm going to take out of it is, are slot receivers going to be something to watch against the Jacksonville defense moving forward? Jalen Ramsey's gone. They do still have A.J. Bouye. They still have their zone cover 3 defense. But are you going to be able to take advantage with the slot receiver against them? Is that what this is a sign of? That's more what my analyst's mind is going to be on moving forward. I'm not going to be looking at Alex Erickson for a fantasy value. Auden Tate came back down to earth a little bit in this one. 3 catches, 65 yards on 6 targets. Look, Tyler Boyd's always going to get peppered a lot, and while he hasn't been super effective as of late, he is somebody who I could believe, especially in PPR leagues, you can continue to play as a wide receiver 3, a flex guy, because you know he's just going to get targeted a ton. You know the Bengals are going to be coming back from behind in every single game they play, unless they play another horrible team like the Dolphins. But they're going to be coming back from behind in every single game that they play. He's going to get peppered with targets. More times not in PPR leagues especially, he's going to have a nice floor for you. Who's disappointing? Joe Mixon. 10 carries, 2 yards. And at the end of the game, I don't know if the Bengals were just like, we lost, so we don't want to get Mixon hurt. But at the very end of the game there, they were just handing the ball off to Giovanni Bernard at the goal line. And Mixon didn't have his helmet on. He has pads pretty much like half off at that point, and he looked like he was definitely not going to be coming back in that game. There was no word of an injury to him, so the only thing I can think of is that they just decided, we're not going to get you hurt at this point. But the Bengals have nothing to play for right now. And this is something that you have to watch when it comes to AJ Green. Because if I'm AJ Green right now, why would I come back to this team? Why? I need a new contract for next year, number one. This team is definitely not going anywhere this year. And unless they're going to make a substantial investment in him over the next 3 years, which is maybe what he has left at this point, if that, then that's the only way I would come back to this team moving forward. But for this season, you're AJ Green. You have one last shot to get a decent contract before your career is up. And maybe he's also hit a point where he wants to play for a contender. I mean, he's been on a bad Bengals team his entire career. We'll see what happens in the trade deadline. There's been a lot of speculation circulating around, and all that's going to come to a head come October 29th, come next Tuesday, because that's when the deadline is. We'll see. Talk is that he would wait until after that to possibly maybe come back, but there's also another report today that the Bengals are 0-7. Why? Why bother? Why bother if you're AJ Green unless you're going to get traded on Tuesday to another team? So that's something I think we're going to have to watch. I think there's a real chance he does get traded. And that will be, that'll have huge implications depending upon the team that it winds up being. Especially if it was San Francisco. I think there'd be a lot of opportunities there. So if you have AJ Green, you got to keep holding on to him. I will say this, though. If you're an AJ Green owner and he doesn't get traded this week, you might just move on. Because I don't know if he comes back and plays for the Cincinnati Bengals if he does not get traded. Or should I say, I don't know if he comes back and plays this season if he does not get traded. So you hold on to him until the trade deadline, but after that, it may be time to dump him and open up that bench spot that you have been using to stash him this entire time. And he may just be the biggest bust of the year. Andy Dalton does what he can do. 276 yards, touchdown, 3 interceptions. Did run for a touchdown in this one. He finds a way to be competent for fantasy purposes as a streaming quarterback, even when it looks terrible, just because he's going to get all kinds of volume every single week. But unless the matchup is right, there's going to be too many games where he could have 3 to 4 turnovers, and depending upon your league scoring for turnovers, just not be good for you at the end of the day. For the Saints and the Chicago Bears, this wound up being a much higher scoring game than I ever expected it to be. Mitchell Trubisky was back, and Mitchell Trubisky was horrible. Now, on one hand, it's sad to see because the Chicago Bears have some really good would-be fantasy-relevant players, if not for Mitchell Trubisky. On the other hand, I told you guys this when he was drafted a couple years ago when I very, very first started the show. Mitchell Trubisky's not good, period. He's not a good quarterback. His wet dream would be becoming Alex Smith. That's as far as his dreams would be able to ever be able to take him. And I'm like, and even that was probably not going to be reachable for this guy. He's not good. He doesn't have a good arm. He doesn't throw with anticipation. He doesn't read defenses. He's only mildly mobile. There's nothing to really like about this guy. Matt Nagy's sitting there pulling his hair out and saying, like, well, something's going to change. I don't know what's going to change. Maybe you know what's going to change. Maybe you don't. I mean, pretty much Mitchell Trubisky had Matt Nagy just, like, having a stroke in front of us in the press conference because he didn't know what to do. He just knows he wants to change something, but I don't think he knows what he wants to change. What are you going to do? Are you going to bench Mitchell Trubisky and have Chase Daniels take over for the rest of the year? Probably not. So what are you going to change? What are you going to do? There's nothing you can do with this offense. The offensive line's banged up. Mitchell Trubisky's your quarterback. I don't know what you think you can change. And that's probably why he looked like he was having an aneurysm at the press conference after that game. David Montgomery, you can't drop him because he is a starting running back. And while in this game he was hardly utilized just because of how the game flow went, he still normally gets 20 carries if they give the opportunity to do so. So in that case, I can't just drop David Montgomery. He is a starting running back in the NFL, but I don't know, unless the matchup is just right for a running back, I don't know the next time you're going to be able to start him with any kind of confidence whatsoever. Allen Robinson was good in this game. A lot of it was based because of volume, but he was good in this game. 10 catches, 87 yards, a touchdown on 16 targets. The one thing that you can count on Mitch Trubisky to do is target Allen Robinson a ton. The second thing you can do is him to target Tariq Cohen a ton. That's it. Anthony Miller, Taylor Gabriel, Trey Burton, fantasy irrelevant as long as Mitchell Trubisky's quarterback. Allen Robinson will get targeted enough, and Tariq Cohen can get targeted enough in certain matchups where he might have PPR value, especially as a flex guy because of how much he just gets utilized when this team is down, and how much Trubisky will throw to him because he's captain check down. Allen Robinson, 10 catches and only went 87 yards. I mean, that kind of tells you all you need to know. The big play's not there. But as long as he keeps getting targeted like this, Allen Robinson continues to be a high-end wide receiver 3. And this was a tough matchup because you're going up against Lattimore for most of it. Was able to still get a touchdown in this one. You can still trust him moving forward, but that's about it for the Chicago Bears. On the Saints side of the ball, Teddy Bridgewater still does well. 281 yards, 2 touchdowns. The biggest thing is that he keeps Michael Thomas fantasy relevant, keeps him as a fantasy wide receiver 1. 9 catches, 131 yards on 11 targets. He is the receiver of the Saints. Even when Drew Brees comes back, we know that's the case. Jared Cook didn't play in this game. Josh Hill actually did get the touchdown, but there's no other receiver. I should say receiver, because pass catcher-wise, we know when Alvin Kamara comes back, you're fine there. But there's no other receiver outside of Michael Thomas that you really care about when it comes to the Saints, but you know Michael Thomas is going to be as consistent as they come. Even this entire stretch with Teddy Bridgewater, he still has averaged 8 or 9 catches per week. It's going to be the same thing with Drew Brees, only he's going to have more opportunities to get even bigger days. But he gets 131 yards in this one. The only thing he didn't do was score. So that continues to be the case. We will see if Drew Brees comes back. There was a lot of talk during the game about if Drew Brees is healthy, he may come back next week against the Arizona Cardinals. I find it hard to believe, being that Teddy Bridgewater now is 5-0, and it's the Cardinals. You don't necessarily need Drew Brees, especially the way they've been playing as of late, to beat the Cardinals, and the bye week is in week 9 for them. So Drew Brees could come back 100% healthy in week 10, no worries, good to go, and you don't really necessarily need him to beat the Cardinals next week. So I would be surprised if that happens. Either way, it doesn't matter. Yes, Michael Thomas will have to go against Patrick Peterson, but they move him around so much, and like I've said, Michael Thomas is the only wide receiver that you want on the Saints because he's who they're going to go to come hell or high water. It doesn't matter who the matchup is. They're going to find a way to get Michael Thomas the ball every single week. That's the one thing Sean Payton has done really well in this stretch. Latavius Murray filled in fabulously for Alvin Kamara. I mean, Latavius Murray is a good running back, especially when he gets the opportunities like he did today to be a workhorse. But I do think he has been left out, and to no fault of his own. I think part of it was because of Drew Brees. But he's shown you that even with Alvin Kamara on the field, and maybe when they get Drew Brees back, why he should still be relevant in the offense. Why he should still be possibly a flex play like we drafted him to be in the season. I mean, a lot of people, we took Latavius Murray in the 8th to 10th round, somewhere in between there, with the idea that he was going to be a guy that he could possibly be in the flex role and play, maybe the Mark Ingram role. Maybe not be quite as heavily involved, but not as uninvolved as he has been. And before this game, last week, he was a little bit more involved. He did well there. And then he shined in this game. 27 carries, 119 yards, 2 touchdowns, tacked on 5 catches for 31 yards. Absolutely unstoppable. The other note to take out of this with Latavius Murray is that the Chicago Bears defense is no longer a top elite run defense. They got torched by Josh Jacobs. Now they're getting torched by Latavius Murray. Hakeem Hicks is out for the rest of the season, and when he goes out, they are not the same run defense. So they are no longer a matchup that you have to be fearful of if you have a running back going up against them, especially if you have a running back who is in a situation that he can get 20 carries. Because you definitely want to still have a running back who has a good amount of volume. But if you have that type of guy, it's no longer a situation that I'm afraid to play him. And we'll have to see. Latavius Murray may be in this role again next week, in a good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. There's no telling what's going on actually with Alvin Kamara. What's clear is that he probably should not have played last week. That's what's clear. And they keep dancing around what the ankle injury actually is. They danced around how serious the knee is. I think the ankle is more worrisome than the knee with Alvin Kamara right now, just from what I've been able to gather from reports about how everything looks. Yes, the knee is a little bit swollen, but from what I understand, nothing is no ligament damage is there necessary right now. Maybe it's just a contusion. It's more the ankle, which keeps getting labeled as a high ankle type injury, but they will not come out and say it's a high ankle sprain. Maybe it's not as severe as one, but the same kind of line of thinking goes with Drew Brees. It's hard for me to imagine if Alvin Kamara is not at least 80%, going up against the Arizona Cardinals, you don't necessarily need him to win. And you have the bye week right there in week 9. If he's really banged up with a knee and an ankle, I don't understand why you wouldn't wait until week 10. Look, Falcons are out. Tampa Bay is hit or miss. Carolina Panthers are not that great. The Saints are in prime position just to take this division right now, and they haven't even had Drew Brees for half the season. There's no reason in my mind why you don't just wait till week 10 where Brees and Alvin Kamara can come back 100%. So I think there's actually a pretty good chance that Latavius Murray may find himself in a workhorse role again next week. So if you have him, you may get another week out of him where you can play him as a workhorse back. Next game, first what we want to do is we're going to take a quick break, come back on the other side. We got plenty more games to recap for you and information to digest. The MD's Fantasy Football Show is proud to become a new member of Overtime Heroics. Overtime Heroics is a fantastic sports media platform for sports fans all around the world to come and participate in their extensive forums. And now with the merger of the Land Sports Network, the website will soon have great content available from extremely well-written articles to entertaining and informative podcasts from all sports for you to enjoy. All you have to do is register for free at overtimeheroics.com to participate. Again, that's overtimeheroics.com. Next game here, coming out of the break, we have the Arizona Cardinals and the New York Giants. A lot of fantasy stuff to break down in this game, surprisingly, for what is really, at the end of the day, a mediocre NFL game. But we had good things on both sides. First of all, Kyler Murray was actually a non-factor in this game. So that was a little bit rough. He was one of my, I think he was number 6 on my rankings list, and didn't really go that way. But not really my fault, and I'm not the only one who projected him in the top 10 this week either against the New York Giants. It wasn't my fault because it was Chase Edmonds' fault. 27 carries, 126 yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns, tacks on 2 catches, 24 yards. The Cardinals, who are an air raid team, who are an up-tempo offense, only threw the ball 21 times in this game, a game they won 27-21. Absolutely incredible. And that's all because of how great Chase Edmonds was in this game. Now, having said that, the New York Giants defense looked like they had zero interest in tackling anybody out there today. But nonetheless, Chase Edmonds took advantage of the opportunities. So, first of all, what we had to talk about, David Johnson, 1 carry, 2 yards, re-aggravates his injury, leaves the game. So if you didn't get to watch this game and you're wondering, hey, why did Chase Edmonds get 27 carries? I thought David Johnson I was following you, Dan, on your Twitter at MDSFF Show for the player update news notifications. You said he's going to be active. He was active. He did start. He re-aggravated himself on the first play, or first carry, I should say. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? He's another guy, kind of like Alvin Kamara, probably shouldn't have been out there in the first place. We'll have to see now for next week. Now, hopefully, if you're a David Johnson owner, you own Chase Edmonds. Now, does it completely suck that you started David Johnson today, most likely, and then you had to watch Chase Edmonds go crazy, and you're like, hey, you know what? I would have started Chase Edmonds if I knew you weren't really going to be able to play. David Johnson, essentially, he pulled the Sammy Watkins, is what he did. Activated the game, started the first series, and then left the game after that. He pulled the Sammy Watkins, because Watkins has done that a few times now to us. Yeah. It sucks. Hopefully you have Chase Edmonds, because I think there's a pretty good chance David Johnson doesn't play next week. Now, having said that, the Cardinals will be playing the Saints. I don't really love the matchup, no matter who the running back is for that one. But, nonetheless, Chase Edmonds is going to get 20-plus touches. You still got to play him. I don't care who he's playing against. So hopefully you have him. If not, Chase Edmonds is still going to be a guy to pick up, and I'm pretty sure he'll be on the waiver wire report. I'll have to run the numbers. He's a guy who was heavily picked up this weekend, so we'll see if he's still less than 50% owned on average throughout all the top platforms. But if he is, he will be on the waiver wire report. So even if you're not a David Johnson owner, he's somebody you should probably be going after. So that's what happened there. As a result, no one else was involved. I mean, if you only threw the ball 21 times, Larry Fitzgerald only had 1 catch for 12 yards. I mean, Pharoh Cooper was the lead target of the day. So pretty much just take this game. other than Chase Edmonds is a very capable backup, which I think we all have kind of already known, and that he can hold his own and produce when given the opportunity to do so. You just take this game and you throw out the performance from Kyler Murray, throw out the performance from the wide receivers. Better days will be ahead for Larry Fitzgerald. He still continues to be a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 for me moving forward. That has not changed. This was just one of those games that just went in a weird way, where Edmonds just got to completely dominate. Now on the Giants side of the ball, welcome back Saquon Barkley. 18 carries, 72 yards, gets his rushing touchdown. Wasn't as involved in the passing game as you're used to seeing him be. 5 targets, 3 catches, 8 yards. That'll come. I'm sure he'll be more involved in the passing game moving forward. The biggest thing is that he didn't re-aggravate his injury. There was one run where he looked like he came up a little ginger. I thought maybe he had re-aggravated it, but he wound up going back on the sideline. He got retaped, and then he came back out into the game, and he was okay. So nothing really to be concerned about there. If you're a Saquon Barkley owner, I think you will still have him for next week too. Daniel Jones was once again mediocre in this game. He's another guy, mark my words, he's another Mitchell Trubisky in my book. Plain and simple. He's moderately mobile. I don't think he has a very good arm. I don't think he reads defenses. I don't think he throws with great anticipation. Like Mitchell Trubisky, he might have stretches and performances where he looks and does really well. Because he has Pat Shurmur as kind of like Matt Nagy for Mitchell Trubisky. He has Pat Shurmur as his play caller and his head coach. These are guys who have made histories on productive offenses with not the top end talent. Let's not forget, Pat Shurmur gave Case Keenum a career year and got him actually signed to starter money to the Denver Broncos. And look how that blew up. He was a career journeyman quarterback and had a hell of a year in the Minnesota Vikings because of Pat Shurmur. So this is a coach who can make something out of nothing. So there's going to be times when Daniel Jones is going to look good. I'm telling you right now, he's not good, though. Not good. As far as the pass catchers go, Golden Tate, once again, number 1 guy. No surprise, Sterling Shepard, as long as he's out, Golden Tate will have free reign as the number 1 wide receiver. 6 catches, 80 yards on 11 targets. By far the most targeted guy. Evan Ingram was the big disappointment in this one. Going up against the Arizona Cardinals to see him only get 1 catch for 6 yards on 5 targets. He did get knocked out of his game for a little bit of a stretch at one point, but he did come back in. He played most of it and just wasn't effective. You're a top-end tight end against the best defense to play against. Now, is this going to be an effect of Patrick Peterson where they're not going to be as pathetic against tight ends moving forward? Possibly. It's possible because I do like Byron Murphy, the rookie corner, as a second corner with Patrick Peterson on the other side. I do think that plays a role so that way you can zone more. You can actually try to cover up the middle of the field more than they had been to this point. So maybe it's going to be a byproduct. We're not going to be as pathetic, but they're not going to be shut down either. This was just a bad performance there out of Evan Ingram. Better days are ahead, though. He's still going to be a guy who's going to compete for that top 7, that top 5 tight end spot by the end of the year. Next up, we got the Rams and the Falcons. This game, we have a ton to unpack. So let's start on the Falcons side of the ball. We have a couple things we have to talk about before we actually get into the recap of the game. Matt Ryan hurts his ankle. Was seen after the game in a walking boot. We will see what happens moving forward. We're not going to know until tomorrow. Or I'm sorry, I'm recording this Sunday night, so this way, this can get you out to you first thing Monday morning. We're not going to know until later on today, on Monday afternoon at some point when he gets the MRI results, exactly what it is we're dealing with. But he was in a walking boot. He did have an ankle injury of some sort. Some people thought it was a knee. It wasn't. I'd rather it be the ankle when it comes to Matt Ryan. We'll see what that means moving forward. Here's what I'll say now. If Matt Ryan is going to miss a decent amount of time, or miss games, just any amount of games, whatever the case may be, it definitely downticks everyone, as you would expect it would, but it especially downticks guys like Austin Hooper, who have been very good, Calvin Ridley, who hasn't been great to this point, but is always a guy who's the threat to get hot at any given moment, and Mohamed Sanu. It destroys their value on a week-to-week basis and being able to trust and play them every week. Destroys their value. Austin Hooper less so than the other two, because I do believe Matt Schaub will look to go to his tight ends. He has a history of doing so, and he actually went to Hooper for a touchdown in this one too. But still, their fantasy value will greatly depreciate. Julio Jones, it takes a little bit of a hit because not Matt Ryan. Devontae Freeman takes a little bit of a hit because not Matt Ryan. But because it's going to be Matt Schaub back there, because their offense as a result will probably have to be a little bit more simplistic, it's going to put guys like Julio and Devontae Freeman in positions where they're going to have to be targeted more and be more heavily involved and be more focal points of the offense, because Matt Schaub's not going to get to the second and third and fourth guys nearly as much. It's going to be Julio. It's going to be checkdowns to Freeman. It's going to be leaning on the running game a little bit more. And after we saw Ito Smith get knocked out in this game, it turns out he was just being looked at for a concussion, but we don't know how long he'll be out because of that injury. It looked like it could have been a hell of a lot worse, though. So we'll see what that means. Devontae Freeman got himself ejected in this game. So if you didn't see this game, I can't imagine you didn't see the non-punch that they ejected him for. That's what it was. It was not. Look, that was to deem that as a swing, as a punch. I mean, you got to be kidding me. It was Aaron Donald has Devontae Freeman choked up and was not letting go. Freeman, who was trying to get away from him at first, that was the weakest so-called swing. If you could see me, I have my fingers up putting in quotations. So-called swing I've ever seen in my life. Devontae Freeman is a 5'8", 210-pound running back against Aaron Donald, who's a 300-pound, 6'4" man. What? What is he supposed to do? Just sit there and be a rag doll for Aaron Donald? Because that's what he was making him in to be. Look, how Devontae Freeman is the one who gets ejected in that game, I'll never understand. But in case you didn't see the game, Freeman didn't get hurt in this one. That's not why his production was lackadaisical in this one, especially with Ito Smith going out. So he was ejected. Just so we're clear there. So moving forward, if Ito Smith is going to miss time, yes, Brian Hill will become the second running back. They don't use him not as much as they use Ito Smith. I expect Devontae Freeman to be actually put in a situation where he could be a workhorse back until Ito Smith comes back. Now, maybe Ito Smith clears concussion next week. Maybe he doesn't. Either way, I think the running game is going to be leaned on a little bit more with Matt Schaub under center if Matt Ryan's going to miss games. And I do think Julio becomes more of the read one target, throw it to the read one target type of deal. Now, Matt Schaub, kind of like Matt Moore, is a competent backup quarterback. So it's not like everyone becomes fantasy irrelevant. That's not what I'm saying. He is competent enough to give some fantasy value to guys in certain situations, especially Julio and Devontae Freeman, and then even in the other guys in some certain matchups. And this is still a Falcons team that's going to be trailing in most of the games they're playing. This is still their defense we're talking about here. So, they don't become fantasy irrelevant, but not the high-end plays that they have been so far this season. We'll see how long Matt Ryan's out, if he's out at all, but we'll find out more as the day goes on. We get the MRI results back. I mean, Matt Schaub, just for, instance, he went 6 for 6, 65 yards and a touchdown in this one. So he was actually good when he came in the game. Granted, it was at the end of the game. Rams playing prevent defense pretty much at that point because they had the game well in hand, but goes to show he's not an incompetent backup to have. Julio in this one, 9 targets, 6 catches, 93 yards. Still found a way to be solid in what was a crappy situation in the game. The real disappointment, of course, was Calvin Ridley. 4 catches, 30 yards, didn't get in the end zone again. He's somebody who's going to have to sit on your bench, especially until this whole quarterback situation plays itself out and you know what you're dealing with. On the Rams side of the ball, they got back to being the Rams. Number one, Todd Gurley played. This offense looks much different when Todd Gurley plays, even if it's not full-time. Now, so there wasn't, this is something we have to talk about too. There wasn't any reports about Todd Gurley being hurt. But he didn't play at all after, I believe it was towards the end of the third quarter. The Rams got down to about the 1 yard. Well, Todd Gurley actually got them down to about the 1 yard line. He had a nice run, got him close to the 1, and then came out of the game and was sitting on the bench with his helmet off. Like there was no chance he was going to come back into the game, but there was no report that he was hurt or anything like that. That's the play where they wound up quarterback sneaking Jared Goff twice. He winds up getting in on the second one. It looked like to me once they got down that close to the 1, it seemed like Sean McVay just made up his mind he was going to quarterback sneak it because he did 2 plays in a row, so that seemed to be the game plan. And from then on, that was when the Rams went up by, I believe, 3 scores. At that point, they had the game well in hand. Matt Ryan was out of the game. I think Sean McVay just took it on himself, like, we don't need you the rest of the game, so just, don't get hurt, basically. We got this one. I think that's what it was, because he wasn't over there. He wasn't getting medical attention or anything. He was just on the bench with his helmet off. That's all. So, I don't think Todd Gurley's banged up. He had 18 carries in this game. You'll always be happy if you get 18 carries. Now, he only had 41 yards, but he does get the receiving touchdown in this one, and he was involved a decent amount. 1 catch, 13 yards, and a touch. So, 19 total touches. You're going to live with that with Todd Gurley. Darrell Henderson came in, played, like I said, he played the whole fourth quarter, basically. 11 carries, 31 yards. He wasn't incredibly efficient with the touches that he had. He wasn't, more involved than Gurley was in the pass game. He also only had 1 catch for 8 yards. So he was fine. Malcolm Brown was out of this game. I think you're fine with Todd Gurley moving forward right now. He's still getting the opportunity to score touchdowns. Jared Goff had a better game. Like I said, it wasn't going to be as bad as it was against the 49ers. I actually expected it to be better than this, though, because he only went for 268 yards and 2 touchdowns. I expected him to get over that 300-yard threshold. But this was a game the Rams just simply dominated. I also thought this game was going to be a shootout. I thought the Falcons would be able to score with them, keeping them aggressive, too, and they weren't able to do so. I mean, Matt Ryan still played most of this game. They did not move the ball, period. Rams defense played much better with Jalen Ramsey. Now, while Julio Jones still had his game, it seemed like the rest of the defense around them played better. And I talked about this when the trade happened on Thursday in the preview episode leading into Week 7. Jalen Ramsey just fits Wade Phillips' play calling better. He can go back to playing man-to-man, not so much zone, which is what he had to do with Marcus Peters. He can have Jalen Ramsey's shadow, which opens up the rest of his blitzing scheme. And as a result, the rest of the defense just played better. So even if Ramsey didn't necessarily shut out Julio Jones, which I didn't fully expect to happen anyway, the rest of the defense was able to play better because now they all fall back into their roles and what Wade Phillips wants to do. So that's my 2 cents. That's what I take away from that in that instance. Robert Woods, 5 catches, 80 yards, 7 targets. The flip side of the Rams offense not having to be so volume heavy in the passing game as we expected is that also Brandon Cooks was once again disappointing in this game. He also had 7 targets with Woods, only 4 catches for 59 yards though. Gerald Everett was the lead guy. Gerald Everett is officially a tight end 1 that you have to play week in and week out because he's involved every week. 10 targets. He led the way in targets in this game. 4 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown. For tight ends right now, the way that it is, he's hands down, without a doubt, a tight end 1, a top 10 tight end that you have to play week in and week out. Cooper Kupp, 6 catches, 50 yards, 8 targets. All of the Rams wide receivers were pretty much mediocre to okay in this game. There's better days ahead. They're going to have bigger games. There's still better days ahead for Brandon Cooks, too. He's still an explosive wide receiver. He's still a guy who finds a way to finish for 1,000 yards and 5 to 7 touchdowns. They'll get there again this year, too. I think this was a good turning point for the Rams offense. And in some ways, maybe even better than a shootout game would have been. Because this is a game in which they controlled, and they just played solid all the way through the team. And all their pieces were on the field. That's the most important part. Next up, we have the Texans, and we have the Indianapolis Colts in this game. Deshaun Watson, 308 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks, did tack on 32 yards rushing, looked more like the Deshaun Watson we saw earlier on in the season. The Colts had a great game plan, though, I will say that. They put a lot of pressure on him, especially early on. They forced him to try to play from the pocket. Will Fuller left this game early with a hamstring injury. We're going to get to more about what that means in a second. But for fantasy purposes, he still had you a serviceable day. Wasn't as high of a day as you were expecting it to. I thought this game could be a little bit more of a shootout, and it wasn't low scoring. But better days are ahead for Deshaun Watson. We've seen what he's been able to do in a hot streak. For this being a down game in the middle of his hot streak, it's still a pretty decent game. So you're not really going to worry about anything there. Carlos Hyde in this one still led the way in carries, 12 carries, 35 yards, but because Houston was coming back from behind quite a bit in this game, he just wasn't able to get as involved as you would like to see him be, especially in a plus matchup against the Colts. As a result, Duke Johnson had to play a little bit more. He had 7 carries, 34 yards, 2 catches, 22 yards. He's going to be more involved in the games in which the Texans have to come back from behind. But the biggest thing you take out of it is that in a game like that, he still only had 2 catches for 22 yards on 5 targets. Even with no Will Fuller, he's still just a guy. That's it. Just a guy. He's just a backup who's just a guy. He's still not somebody who you need to own. And if you have Carlos Hyde, I don't need to own Duke Johnson to be the handcuff. I don't. So Duke Johnson to me is somebody who doesn't need to be owned in fantasy leagues right now. Just doesn't. He's not involved enough in the ways you need him to be, which is in the passing game. DeAndre Hopkins comes in, 9 catches, 106 yards, a touchdown, 12 targets. Finally gets his get-right game, gets back on track. Yes, Will Fuller being hurt definitely helps with that. And I think we know what to expect. Look, if Will Fuller really has a hamstring issue, he's probably going to miss at least a couple games. I think we know what to expect out of DeAndre Hopkins over the next couple of weeks. Double-digit targets, for sure. And we know what Hopkins can do in double-digit targets. Now, Kenny Stills. This is where we get into the Will Fuller injury and what it means. If he's going to miss a couple of weeks, Kenny Stills, to me, is a wide receiver 3. In this offense, it's going to lean heavily on passing because their defense, their secondary is the way that it is right now. Kenny Stills is going to be a guy. He has 4 catches for 105 yards in this one, 5 targets. He's going to be the lone deep threat guy. Just like Will Fuller when Kenny Stills was out. Now, Will Fuller's better than Kenny Stills, but just like when Kenny Stills was out, when he had the down the field opportunities all to himself, he was able to capitalize. And even last week, when he, from a production standpoint, wasn't able to, he had the opportunities. The same thing's going to be there for Kenny Stills. So I do think Kenny Stills is somebody who's definitely going to be my waiver wire report, definitely going to be somebody I want to pick up, definitely somebody you can play as a wide receiver 3 until Will Fuller comes back. Expect Kute to come back into the lineup. He's just, I don't know. They're not using him the same way either. He's not that PPR threat that he was when he first came onto the scene a year ago. Not in the same light, even though this could be a high-volume offense. So I think I would probably leave Kute on the waiver wire report. I'm not going to, or not on the waiver wire report. I would leave him on the waivers and not really deal with him there. He just doesn't have enough of a ceiling, plain and simple. But he is going to be the third receiver moving forward as long as Will Fuller's out. On the Colts side of the ball, Jacoby Brissett was great. One of my streaming quarterbacks calls that I nailed. I had him ranked in the top 10. He definitely finished there. 326 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Only tacked on 6 yards rushing. And one of the biggest things about him for fantasy purposes is he has been rushing good, 20 to 40 yards per game, tacking on points that way. So he did it all with his arm. He looked great out there. And the other thing to take away is Zach Pascal. We've been waiting all year to see, is a second receiver outside of T.Y. Hilton going to emerge for this Colts team for Jacoby Brissett? That has happened now over the past 2 weeks. I think it's Zach Pascal the rest of the way for me. We've seen it now 2 weeks in a row. This game, he had a huge game, 6 catches, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns on 7 targets. Second most targets, of course, to T.Y. Hilton, who had 11. And 6 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown in his own right. But Zach Pascal is the second pass catcher on the Colts that you want to own moving forward. And I do think he's somebody who is worthy of you picking up. And in certain matchups where the Colts are going to be in games they're going to have to score to keep up, like this one against the Houston Texans, I do think he's going to have flex appeal in those certain matchups. It's definitely going to be a matchup basis. Definitely going to be, what options do you have, whether it's bye weeks, injuries, whatever. But he's that guy. I do think this offense has always been able to be in a position to give a second wide receiver fantasy value. It's just a matter of who is it going to be to step up. It looks like it's going to be Zach Pascal now. So something to keep in mind there. Marlon Mack in this one, wasn't as effective as he wanted him to be. He did get the 18 carries. He still continues to get his volume. 44 yards rushing. Minimally available in the pass game. 3 catches, 12 yards on 3 targets. But you're going to, at the end of the day, when you get 21 touches out of Marlon Mack, you're going to be fine. He still comes in as a high-end RB2, low-end RB1 for me. There's going to be better days ahead as well. The passing game was just so effective in this one, which is why I think he got left out of it a little bit. Just a quick note, Eric Ebron, 4 catches, 70 yards, a touchdown, 5 targets. He looked much better in this game. Jacoby Brissett was looking for him more in this game. Maybe that's something we see moving forward. Right now, at the tight end position, if anybody even shows you a pulse, you have to pay attention. Eric Ebron, somebody who I'm keeping an eye on if I'm in a desperate streaming situation. All right, we're going to take a quick break, come back on the other side. We still got some more games to recap for you. Tired of spending hours upon hours on research for your drafts, but still want the excitement of having something on the line while watching the game? Well, join the Thrive Fantasy app, where they have streamlined the process for you to make it easy and fun to play along. Use promo code MDFF when you sign up with a $10 deposit and receive an additional $10 for free. Again, that's promo code MDFF. Rolling right along here, we have our actual shootout of the week. Thus far, we don't know what happened in the Monday night game yet. And in the Sunday night game, it's looking a little one-sided on the Cowboys right now as we're recording this Sunday night. But our big shootout of the week thus far was the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions. A lot of good stuff to talk about in this one, too. First of all, Kirk Cousins. This isn't a top-notch Detroit's defense, but this is a pretty good Detroit defense. This is a decent Detroit defense. So if your thing before was like, hey, he did well against the Giants, he threw the ball really well against the Eagles, this is a decent defense that while Darius Slay did get hurt in this game in the first half and then come back in, was there to start the game and lost Adam Thielen in the first half in this game too. And he still threw for 337 yards and 4 touchdowns. So the Kirk Cousins we saw in the beginning of the year is out. And we know Kirk Cousins is streaky. We know it was a matter of time. He was going to play. First of all, he was better than what he was showing. That's number one. And we also know that when Kirk Cousins gets on a roll, he stays hot for a little while. And he has the weapons in this offense. He has officially put himself back. Now that it's been 3 weeks, and as I said it had to be one more week. I had to see it against Detroit, against a decent defense, and it had to be 3 weeks in a row we played well before I could be like, okay, you can come back in the streaming territory because he had burned me too many times at the beginning of the year. He's back in the streaming category. Starting with this week against the Washington Redskins, BTW, the only thing I would be worried about as far as streaming Kirk Cousins this upcoming week in the Thursday night game against the Washington Redskins would be that the Vikings could blow them out running the football if they wanted to, or just blow them out in general with the defense, and they don't have to throw the ball that many times. That would be the only thing I'd be worried about. But as far as the matchup goes, I mean, yeah. And the way he's been playing lately, the other guy who's going to be really good for Thursday Night Football is Stefon Diggs. Adam Thielen can come out and say all he wants to, that he thinks he's going to be good to go come Thursday, week 8. Dude, you couldn't come back in this game because of a hamstring injury. That shit doesn't heal overnight. It doesn't. So, you're not going to come back in 3 days from a hamstring. Not going to happen. We're waiting for MRI results later on Monday, so we'll see what comes back. But this sounds more like that's one of these situations where it's just like players speak. Like, I'll be okay. I'll be able to go. I can do it. There's no way. Going against the Washington Redskins, who only have 1 win on the season, the Vikings do not need Adam Thielen to win this game. There's no way they're going to have Adam Thielen come back on a short week, even if his hamstring injury winds up being minor. There's no way. Positively no way. So Stefon Diggs, Dalvin Cook, sky's the limit for them this week against the Washington Redskins coming up. They played great in this one. Dalvin Cook, 25 carries, 142 yards, 2 touchdowns. And this has been a middle-of-the-pack Detroit run defense, too. Now, Snack Harrison did come out of this game for a little bit while, but he did come back into the game, so he wasn't out for the entire thing. Dalvin Cook, he just ran. He gashed them he's gashed everybody. He really has. Even when he's had tough matchups, he's found a way to get in the end zone. So, fantasy purposes, he hasn't had one bad fantasy game all year. He looks good. Just keep it rolling. And he should have another great matchup against the Washington Redskins next week, too. And he didn't even get that involved in the passing game in this one, either. Stefon Diggs, 7 catches, 142 yards. I mean, it's almost deja vu this week. The only thing he didn't do this week that he did last week was score the 3 touchdowns. That's truly the only difference. He had 162 yards and 3 touchdowns last week, 142 yards this week. I think it's safe to say Stefon Diggs is back on the what you drafted him to be train. That top-end wide receiver 2, borderline wide receiver 1 type of player. And with Kirk Cousins playing now the way he is, with Adam Thielen a little bit banged up, with the schedule that I have been ramping up all season long that the Vikings were eventually going to hit, which was going to open things up for their wide receivers and their passing game in general, just get back on track. Yeah, they're right in that schedule now. Stefon Diggs is going to be a top-end wide receiver 2 moving forward. I know what you're saying. It's like, oh, he's only had 2 good games. 2 good back-to-back games where it looks like the offense in general, especially the passing offense, has taken a turn and is starting to play more what we expected to see earlier on in the season. So I expect that to continue. Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith Jr. were both very involved in this game after Adam Thielen went out. And at least Thielen had the good graces to get you guys a touchdown before he went out. So it wasn't like he had a terrible fantasy day, actually. He didn't lose because of Adam Thielen. But the Titans were heavily involved. I would suspect the Titans would be involved if Adam Thielen were to miss games, including the Redskins this week. Now, here's the thing. They were involved equally. Both had 6 targets. Both had 5 catches. They were actually only separated by 2 yards. The difference was Kyle Rudolph was the one who had the touchdown. So what I mean by that is I don't know who you trust fantasy-wise, so I probably would not pick them up or stream them for fantasy purposes at the tight end position. But they are going to be more involved, just to keep, an eye out in case one of them does emerge. My money would be most likely Irv Smith Jr. as far as fantasy purposes go, but he's not always on the field. And that's why it may be a situation where it's like the Houston Texans, where the tight end position, if you were to mold it into one person, would be a top-end tight end. But because it's 2 guys who split the touches too much, as a result, I don't think you can play either one. with any kind of confidence whatsoever. On the Detroit Lions side of the ball, we have to wait to see what happened to Kerryon. He went out of this game in the first half with a knee injury. Now, here's what I will say. He was questionable for a long time. They didn't rule him out until they came out of the half in the second half. So, that's usually at least a decent sign that it's not something too serious. Because if it's really serious, if it's significant, they'll usually know right away and they'll just rule the player out right away. So the fact that they waited until after halftime to officially rule him out and kept him questionable that entire time until then, it does tell me that it may not be a serious knee injury. Doesn't mean he won't still miss necessarily next week. Doesn't mean he might not miss a game or two, depending on what it is. And we're not going to know until later on today, most likely. We'll probably get some word on that. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at MDSFF Show for the player news update notifications, because that will be one of the top priorities pretty much all week. So we're probably not going to know more details till later. But that would be my one caveat of, if it was really serious, they would have ruled him out right away. The fact that they didn't makes me feel like it might not be too serious. So just to kind of keep that in mind. But he was out early in this game. Now, so what happened after that? Who's going to be the guys? Ty Johnson came in. He's the one who had 10 carries for 29 yards. J.D. McKissic also had 29 yards, but on half the amount of work, on 5 carries. J.D. McKissic was also much more involved in the passing game. Or, I shouldn't say much more involved. He was also more efficient in the passing game. 2 catches, 31 yards on 3 targets, while Ty Johnson had 4 catches of 28 yards on 4 targets. So, while J.D. McKissic had, quote-unquote, become the second running back, it does seem like if something happens to Kerryon Johnson, the true handcuff is Ty Johnson. That's the true handcuff. Now, it'll be, if Kerryon would have missed time, it would definitely be a form of a committee between the two, between Ty Johnson and J.D. McKissic. The good news is that it seems like they both will be involved in the rushing and the passing game. Ty Johnson does seem to be the guy who's going to get more touches than J.D. McKissic. And when they get in the goal line, it's going to be Ty Johnson over J.D. McKissic as well. So something to keep in mind there. That's why my handcuff, the guy I would pick up for Kerryon would be Ty Johnson. Something to keep in mind there. But J.D. McKissic will be involved. It's not going to be a workhorse situation. So we'll wait to find out more on Kerryon moving forward. The big guy we have to talk about is Marvin Jones Jr. I mean, 10 catches, 93 yards on 4 touchdowns. Are you serious? 13 targets? Absolutely incredible. Had all the touchdowns from Matthew Stafford. All of them. Danny Amendola was heavily involved. Now, Amendola is going to be hit or miss. I know after this game, a lot of people are like, oh, well, he's healthy, so he could be a PPR asset. It's not untrue, but the one thing you have to take into consideration here is that the Minnesota Vikings did a great job on Kenny Golladay, who only had 1 catch for 21 yards. So definitely a huge disappointment for a guy who's been a wide receiver too, and most people have been playing him in your lineups. But keep that in mind. It took Kenny Golladay barely being able to get involved in this game for Danny Amendola. Marvin Jones is Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones he's going to be a big play. He's going to be a red zone threat. Now, of course, not every game is going to be four touchdowns. That's not going to happen very often. But his role is his role. Danny Amendola, I think, only eats if Kenny Golladay doesn't. More times than not, Kenny Golladay is going to be the guy who gets to eat. He's not going to play Xavier Rhodes every week. So just keeping that in mind there before you go crazy over Danny Amendola. TJ Hockenson, again, disappointing in this game. Now, I will say this, the silver line for TJ Hockenson is he didn't drop a touchdown in this game, but on the other hand, he wasn't given the opportunity to do so either. Matthew Stafford played great. I mean, I've been talking about Matthew Stafford all year long, how he's one of my top, most favorite streaming quarterbacks. He's a borderline QB1. He's a top-end QB2 for sure. There's going to be matchups in games where you can put him in the top 12 of quarterbacks and he can be a QB1. It's why he's one of my top streamers this year. But I've been talking about him all year long because he's looked so good to me. He has all the weapons. He's the guy who can get it done. He hadn't been huge for fantasy purposes up until this point, and going against the Minnesota Vikings, I didn't expect him to have a great game, but this wound up being a shootout game, and the fact that he was able to play this well against this defense makes you feel pretty confident in some of the really good matchups that he does have coming up in his schedule, that you're going to be able to play him as a top streamer and expect him to be able to perform. And if Kerryon Johnson is going to miss a couple of games, to me that means there's going to be more emphasis on the passing game, more volume there for Matthew Stafford to use too. So something else to kind of keep in mind moving forward. Next game up, we have the Dolphins and the Bills. Not really much to talk about in this game as far as fantasy-wise goes. Dolphins played a much more competitive game than maybe I expected them to. Ryan Fitzpatrick, 282 yards, a touchdown. That one touchdown did go to Devontae Parker, and Preston Williams was decent in this game too. 6 catches, 82 yards on 8 targets. Parker had 10, 5 catches, 55 yards. One thing we know about Ryan Fitzpatrick is that he doesn't care about throwing it up to down the field to his big play guys, and he'll also predominantly throw the ball to the outside wide receivers or the slot guys. So Parker and Williams, who had been getting a healthy amount of targets for really the past month now, should continue to be able to do so. It makes them nothing more than wide receiver 4s, who in a desperate situation you may play, but this is a Buffalo Bills defense coming off of a bye week that they actually played pretty well against. Just pointing out that not a lot of teams are going to do that well against this Buffalo Bills defense. Especially at the outside receivers. So, something to watch there. Mark Walton was by far the lead running back. 14 carries, 66 yards. He was decent. Look, the trade deadline's Tuesday. I'm hoping they trade Kenyon Drake. I know last week the stories about them trying to trade him ramped up a little bit. I hope they do. And maybe this was a sign that they're going to. I don't get it. I don't understand how Mark Walton could be the lead running back over Kenyon Drake. It was bad enough when we had to suffer through Kalen Ballage, who once again got another touchdown in this game. It was bad enough we had to suffer through Kalen Ballage, who we knew was not nearly as good as running back as Kenyon Drake. Mark Walton is a guy who was almost not even in the NFL this year, granted mostly due to off-the-field issues, but had been a third string in Cincinnati, and he was your lead guy. I mean, Kenyon Drake's a hell of a player. This is just crazy to me. So, really hope they're trading him. If they're not, you might have to. Kenyon Drake might officially be dropped. Look, I've been holding on to him, especially in PPR leagues, just because he had been doing enough to actually be serviceable over the past few weeks. But in a game in which the Dolphins have shown more life on offense than they had so far this season, for it to be Mark Walton who was the one getting the touches for the most part, I don't know how you can expect Kenyon Drake to ever have a good game this year. Hopefully he gets traded. Hopefully. Next week's the deadline. Hopefully he gets traded next week. But, if he doesn't, Kenyon Drake might be somebody you just have to move on from. Especially if they're going to be having Mark Walton be this involved, especially if Kalen Ballage is going to get the goal line work. On the Buffalo Bills side of the ball, I told you guys to kind of stay away from Frank Gore and Devin Singletary. I got asked a ton of questions Sunday morning about this. Should I play Frank Gore or Devin Singletary? I got one question that was, should I play Frank Gore and Devin Singletary or Melvin Gordon in my flex? I rightfully told him Melvin Gordon. Now, Melvin Gordon didn't wind up having that great of a game. He should have had 2 touchdowns, but still, Frank Gore, 11 carries, 55 yards. He was fine, but he had to split up the carries. 7 carries for 26 yards to Devin Singletary. Now, the real kicker was Singletary wasn't really involved in the passing game. None of the running backs were really involved in the passing game in this one for the Buffalo Bills. So that's where we want to see him get a little bit more involved, especially if he is going to be splitting with Frank Gore as far as the carries go for the foreseeable future. I still stand strong on he's going to eventually take over this job. But until that happens, you got to see him get more involved in the passing game. Otherwise, even in great matchups like this against Miami Dolphins, it's going to be hard to trust them. It's going to be hard to trust either one because you know they're going to cut into each other. Josh Allen was fine in this game, 200 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, rushed for 32 yards. Wasn't quite the game that everybody was hoping for when they were streaming him, but he still met that streaming territory of what you're looking for out of guys, so you're not going to be too worried about him. John Brown did have a good game. I had him in my top 12. We'll have to see when Monday Night Game's over if he actually winds up staying in my top 12 for the week, but he was my number 11 receiver on the week, 5 catches, 83 yards, a touchdown. Had a good game in this one. Expected him to do so. Next game up, the 49ers and the Redskins. There's not going to be a lot to talk about in this game. Look, this is another one of those games, kind of wrap it up, throw it out. You don't really need the data in this game for fantasy purposes moving forward. Matt Breida got a little bit banged up in this game, missed a stretch of time. That's why the carry discrepancy between him and Tevin Coleman was so significant, where Coleman got 20 carries in this game, Breida got 8. The weather was so bad in this game. I mean, you could basically have played water polo football. Like, they were basically swimming on that field. So, that's why I say, like, you pretty much wrap this game up, throw it all away. Because it It was weather that you're not going to play in, again, at any point this season, and it didn't allow you to be able to do anything. Anything. Only the running backs found a little bit of success. Adrian Peterson, 20 carries, 81 yards. But Terry McLaurin wasn't able to do anything. Nobody in the pass catchers for the 49ers were able to do anything. The quarterbacks weren't able to do anything. This is just a game you just move on from and chalk it up to chalk it up to bad weather and know that it's not going to happen again. So everything that you previously thought fantasy-wise for the 49ers, especially for the Redskins too, I mean, don't only talk about Terry McLaurin, but for the Redskins too, stays the same going into Week 8. We're going to take one last break, come back on the other side. We still have 2 more games we're going to recap for this episode, and then we'll close it down. The MD's Fantasy Football Show is now partnered with the Unwrapped Sports Network. Unwrapped Sports Network has a top-notch sports blog covering all sports all the time with a team of talented writers. You can also visit their podcast page to listen to this show and several others covering multiple sports. Sign up for their newsletter and never miss a thing at unwrappedsports.com. Again, that's unwrappedsports.com. You want to talk about a game that surprised everyone. The Green Bay Packers and the Oakland Raiders, that game turning into a shootout, especially in the fashion that it did, shocked the hell out of everyone. 50 points for Aaron Rodgers with no Davante Adams. And what we thought leading into Sunday, possibly no anyone. And then wound up having Geronimo Allison and Marquez Valdes-Scantling be activated in warm-ups at the game time decision. So he did get those guys. But I don't think anybody expected this performance. Yes, it's a plus match against the Raiders. No one expected this. 429 yards. 5 passing touchdowns. Not to mention tax on a rushing touchdown to make 6 total touchdowns. 50 points out of Aaron Rodgers with no Davante Adams. I know everyone's been super down on Aaron Rodgers. And I have too. For good reason. He hasn't been that great for fantasy purposes outside of 1 week up until this point. He was solid last week, but that was it. But he also played the toughest defense he's going to play all year in the beginning part of this season. Now we're into a much easier schedule for the Green Bay Packers as far as Aaron Rodgers goes. He's playing much better. The offensive line is playing much better. The passing attack looks like more like a Green Bay Packer passing attack, frankly. And they're taking advantage. Now, let's add Davante Adams back to that mix, maybe as soon as next week. Aaron Rodgers suddenly might catapult himself back in the QB1 territory. This doesn't automatically put him there now, but this does put him borderline QB1, top-end QB2. The fact that he was able to finally have this big game and look like they finally got back on track in this one. And they were doing the Green Bay Packer thing where they threw the ball even when they were up by multiple scores and didn't necessarily have to throw the ball. That's always been the key with Aaron Rodgers. Are they still going to be aggressive and throw the football even if they don't necessarily have to? It really hadn't been the case so far this season. It was in this game. Absolutely incredible. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had a touchdown. Only 2 catches, but still goes over 133 yards. That's what Scantling does. He's a big play guy. Big player bust, which makes him really hard to trust for fantasy purposes. I could trust him a little bit more when Davante Adams comes back because he'll fit his role a little bit better. But these are things that he can do. It makes him more of a DFS play than anything else. Jimmy Graham still looked like a super slow shell of himself, but caught the ball in situations where was wide open and nobody was around him, and he was able to turn it into something. 4 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Jamal Williams caught a touchdown. Aaron Jones caught a touchdown. Jake Kumaro caught a touchdown. But the big thing here is both Jones and Jamal Williams catching touchdowns, and then Aaron Jones dominating in the way of carries. Now, there wasn't a ton of carries to dominate, but he did have 12 carries to Jamal Williams' 3 for 50 yards. Now, if you weren't to play Jamal Williams after last week, thinking it was going to be more of a 50-50 split, he still got you the touchdown. It wasn't as much of a 50-50 split in this game. However, having said that, they also didn't lean on the running backs in general in this game nearly as much as they did on Monday night either. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. Aaron Jones' value took a hit last week. I do believe he's nothing more than a low-end RB2 now, moving forward, just because the work is not going to be there. He's not going to have the volume necessarily to be that top end RB2 that he could possibly be if he was given that situation. That hasn't changed. Jamal Williams still is a flex appeal option. What I will say, when Davante Adams comes back, though, I think Jamal Williams goes back to being more of a handcuff than a flex appeal option. I think right now he's involved because he has to be a little bit more involved in the passing game just because Davante Adams is not around. But when he is, I think he'll go back to being just a handcuff guy. But still taking away from Aaron Jones enough that he will be nothing more than a low-end RB2. Just keep that in mind. But this is a good sign if you have Aaron Rodgers that he may be fantasy relevant, elite Aaron Rodgers soon again, especially with the schedule now for the next few weeks being much easier for them. So not a lot to talk about there. On the Raiders side of the ball, Derek Carr was Derek Carr, 293 yards, 2 touchdowns, 22-28, whatever. Mike Glennon had to come in this game for a little bit at the end when it was out of hand. Actually had a touchdown off of 2 throws. Go figure. But Josh Jacobs, story of this game. He actually came out of this game for a little bit too and then wound up coming back in. Still wound up with 21 carries for 124 yards. Only had 3 catches for 10 yards in this one, and that was kind of the surprising part. But we know Josh Jacobs can catch the ball. And now this is the second game in a row he's had plus 20 carries. That's the game plan moving forward, especially with no Tyrell Williams. That's the game plan moving forward. Use Josh Jacobs. Run the football. Josh Jacobs is entering high-end RB2 territory in my book because he's actually one of the few running backs who is not necessarily in that elite superstar category, but is getting the workhorse type level opportunities with his 20-plus carries. Is a guy that we know can play all 3 downs because we know he can catch the ball too. So things are looking up for Josh Jacobs as well. Darren Waller, 7 catches, 126 yards, and finally takes the lid off the end zone and gets 2 touchdowns in this one on 8 targets. As long as Tyrell Williams is out, and it sounds like it could still be a while from now that he is, Darren Waller will be the number 1 pass catcher for the Oakland Raiders and should be the guy they go to for the red zone. Now, yes, it was the first game where he actually got in the red zone, but the fact he got 2 touchdowns here, the fact they were looking for him there, shows me that he's going to have more opportunities to come. But most of all, he's going to have a very safe floor. First of all, as a tight end, he's going to be one of the top-end tight ends because he's going to have a hell of a floor. He's the number 1 pass catcher of the offense. He's always going to have a great amount of volume, and he has the capability with the athleticism that he has to get 100-yard games in big games like this. But even just as a general, if you don't play with a tight end or if you have 2 good let's say there's a real possibility that you could have a guy like Mark Andrews and Darren Waller. Let's say that's the situation. You would play both of them. Darren Waller can be a flex play for you in that situation if you can't play your tight end at a wide receiver spot. And I would play him there because of the volume he's going to get. Because I would play Mark Andrews at the tight end because he's going to still be a top 5 tight end the rest of the way. He was disappointing in this game, sure. We're going to get to that in a second. But, yeah, I would play him in those situations. So Darren Waller to me is a guy who has more value than just being a tight end, but he's also one of the top end ones too. Next game to talk about is that Ravens-Seattle game. So we'll stick with the Ravens side of the ball first. There was no Marquise Brown in this one, so that meant Mark Andrews was going to get the volume because he's going to be the number 1 pass catcher. And he did. He had 8 targets in this game. Only came down with 2 catches for 39 yards. Should have had a touchdown. Caught it, bobbled it, wasn't able to complete the catch to go into the ground. Should have had a touchdown in this one. Would have had a much better fantasy day. He's still a guy who's going to be a top 5 tight end. He's still the number 1 pass catcher for this team. Now they go on bye next week, so keep that in mind. You're going to have to find another tight end for that. But should be number 1 pass catcher for this team as long as Marquise Brown is out. And even when Marquise Brown is in there, he had been the number 1 targeted pass catcher for the team anyway. But it's even more so when Brown's not there. So nothing to worry about there. Just a situation that could have been a lot better that wasn't great. Lamar Jackson's passing ability. Let's focus on the passing right now. 9 for 20, 143 yards. That'll also be better with Marquise Brown because even when Marquise Brown is not putting up a great stat line, his ability to take the top off the field opens up everything else. It allows Lamar Jackson to be a little more accurate in the intermediate part of the field. It opens things up a little bit for the tight ends, multiple tight ends, for guys like Miles Boykin and Willie Snead. So Marquise Brown's a big cog in that, in sense of, even if he's not necessarily producing the high amount of fantasy points you would want him to, and he really hasn't since week 2, he still opens up everything else for the rest of the offense. So look for him to come back after the bye week heading into week 9. But Lamar Jackson does what Lamar Jackson does, and that is he ran for over 100 yards in this one, 116 yards, gets you to the rushing touchdown, still gets you plus 20 fantasy points. I believe he's on pace, I think he's actually on pace to break Michael Vick's rushing record for a quarterback this season so far. We'll see if he's able to do that. Michael Vick was always a cheat code for that reason, because if he gave you anything in the passing game, he was going to be putting up 30 points. That's basically how Lamar Jackson is. Lamar Jackson can give you 225 yards and a touchdown or two in the passing game. He's probably going to give you 30 points that day, because he's probably going to give you a ton on the ground too. So fantasy purposes, he continues to be a QB1. On the Seattle side of the ball, weren't really able to take advantage in a lot of situations. Ravens defense, first of all, played a lot better, looked pretty good already with Marcus Peters. Russell Wilson had a rough game in this one. 20-41, 241 yards, touchdown, a pick 6 in this game. Also had a fumble recovered. It was, look, he's still an MVP candidate. He's still been great for fantasy purposes, still has better days ahead. There's nothing here to really worry about when it comes to Russell Wilson. It's just a rough game for him in general. Rashad Penny came back. And like I had said all week, Chris Carson had been so good that I didn't expect Rashad Penny to have a significant role. And boy, did he not. I believe he was on the field for 2 snaps, wasn't involved at all. Chris Carson still had 21 carries, only 65 yards. I mean, this isn't the best matchup in the world, but they have been a defense some teams have been able to take advantage of as of late, but also Seattle Seahawks fell down early in this game. So while Chris Carson had 21 carries, it was all in very predictable situations that he was trying to run the ball. Better days are ahead for him, but you like that you saw in the first game Rashad Penny was back, that Chris Carson was still very, very much the man. And Rashad Penny wasn't really involved. Now, I expect Penny to be more involved in what he was in this game, more than 2 snaps. But I think you're not going to worry about Chris Carson losing that much work to Rashad Penny moving forward. As far as receivers go, Tyler Lockett continues to be solid. 5 catches, 61 yards, a touchdown, 7 targets in this game. He wasn't even the most targeted wide receiver. He still just is the most effective pass catcher Russell Wilson goes to. DK Metcalf was actually that guy. He had a rough fumble at the end there, but not going to hold it against him. He's been having a hell of a rookie year. 4 catches, 53 yards in this game. He has bigger days ahead. You know when to play DK Metcalf. When he's in a situation where he's going to have an opportunity to take the top off the defense, you play him, because he's going to have that chance. Russell Wilson's going to take those chances. But Tyler Lockett is, he's not a wide receiver 1, but he continues to be an incredibly high-end wide receiver 2 with an incredibly high floor. He hasn't had really a bad game at all this year either. So continue to play him. The only other thing we wanted to keep our eye on was there a tight end that was going to take the lead with Will Dissly being out. Jacob Hollister was the tight end that was targeted the most. He had 6 targets in this game, 3 catches, 20 yards. I think really at the end of the day, it's just going to be more targets for Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf moving forward, and that's it. So that finally is going to wrap up the show today. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Remember, we're going to be back tomorrow with the Sunday night and the Monday night recap, along with the waiver wire report. Very exciting stuff there. I hope you guys all enjoyed this show. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at MDSFF Show, as we have a lot of injuries. We're going to be coming out with player news update notifications as the day goes on. Make sure you're following me on Facebook at MDFF Show, and make sure you're checking out the website for all of the rankings and the episodes, www.mdffshow.com. Make sure you're checking me out on Belly Up Sports, at Belly Up Fantasy, the Belly Up Sports Network. We were out there on Sunday, 9 a.m., answering everybody's questions. I have to say, went pretty successfully. I had a lot of good calls. I think almost all of my calls went right, except for maybe one. And so we were doing great things there, so make sure you're checking us out, following us there, and check out my other networks as well, Unwrapped Sports Network, Overtime Heroics Network, all great things to do. And make sure you're listening to me on your favorite podcast app, whatever it may be, Google Play, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, but make sure you leave a review. Leave a 5-star review and a comment. It helps the show in ways that you guys, I don't even think, understand how much it helps the show when you do that for us. So I really appreciate it from you guys from MD Nation, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to the MD's Fantasy Football Show.